You are watching The World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. Here are the top stories we're tracking at the moment. Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived in France to begin a three-nation swing through Europe, designed to bolster ties even as trade tensions mount. Xi Jinping will also visit Serbia, which isn't a member state of the bloc, and Hungary. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected ceasefire proposals because he says Hamas's call for withdrawal of all troops from Gaza and it's not acceptable. The end of the war is also not acceptable. Israel's government has moved to shut down the operations of the Al Jazeera television network in the country, branding a mouthpiece for Hamas. Israel's Prime Minister has said the cabinet agreed to the closure while the war in Gaza is ongoing. Google is making its last attempt to fight back against a historic effort by the US Department of Justice to break the tech giant's grip on online search as the most significant antitrust trial in 25 years comes to a close in Washington. Well, a big focus. China's President Xi Jinping has lauded China's ties with France as a model for the international community as he arrived in Paris for a rare visit against a backdrop of mounting trade disputes with the European Union. Now, at a time of tensions with much of Europe over China's no-limits embrace of Russia despite the war in Ukraine, its surveillance state and its apparent espionage activities that led to the recent arrest in Germany of 4 people, Mr. Xi Jinping, who arrived in France on Sunday, wants to demonstrate China's growing influence on the continent and pursue a pragmatic rapprochement. For Europe, this visit will test its delicate balancing act between China and the United States and will no doubt be seen in Washington as a none too subtle effort by Mr. Xi to divide Western allies. From France, Xi Jinping will move on to the warm embrace of Serbia, where China is the second largest trading partner, and then Hungary, where its Prime Minister Viktor Orban has backed enormous Chinese investment and used his country's position as a European Union member to dilute criticism of China. Both countries, Britain and American power, as you know. But beyond these two friends of China, there are, however, serious European differences with Beijing, whose economy was roughly the same size measured in dollars as the European Union's when Mr. Xi last visited back in 2019. China's economy is now some 15% bigger. To understand the ramifications of Xi Jinping's touchdown in Europe, we have my correspondent Gauri Dwivedi joining us live at the moment. Gauri, now, instead of hosting Xi at the Palace of Versailles, the French president invited him to his city centre residence for a more work-like summit. Now, some argue that Emmanuel Macron is playing a dual game with Beijing. Help us decode where things stand and what we can expect from the Chinese president's touchdown.
Parmeshwar, there's a lot riding on this visit for all stakeholders, for Xi Jinping as well, because the last time he went, he managed to secure Italy's cooperation to join the BRI, the only G7 country to endorse the BRI. So that's how significant his last visit was. And he would want that similar takeaways happen this time around as well. But there's been a lot of change since then. There is now a growing view within the EU that Chinese state-owned enterprises do subsidize heavily and they cause a lot of damage to European industries. And for that, they've started the probe in the electric vehicle space. So EV is going to be the biggest area where there will be discussions. It is early to say whether or not there'll be any breakthrough or not, because EU says they are going to go ahead with probes and possibly slap heavy duties on China, anywhere between 15 to 30%. Of course, China is not going to sit idle, that it's going to slap retaliatory tariffs on everything that EU exports to China. So that's the backdrop of this meeting that's going to be very significant. At the same time, there are geopolitical tensions and crises as well. The whole of EU knows, and Macron knows, that it is Xi Jinping who has a certain amount of leverage on Putin to stop the Ukraine crisis to go any further. It's been 2.5 years. There's no end in sight. And they would want that Xi Jinping should also use his leverage to possibly find some sort of an end to that stalemate.
Right. You know, Gauri, on his first visit to Europe in 5 years, the Chinese president many geopolitical experts argue, appears intent on seizing opportunities to loosen EU's bonds with the United States and also forge a world freed of American dominance?
Yeah, okay. So there is definitely going to be a lot of effort to ensure that the transatlantic wedge between US and EU on how they deal with China grows. That's what that's what Xi Jinping is definitely going to try and achieve even more. So with US, there is now a greater trade war that China is facing, but that isn't the stage right now that EU and China discussions are on. They could be headed that way. It's early to say, but as of now, they are not at the same level. So Xi Jinping would want that he manages to deepen that wedge between how EU views Chinese industries, Chinese trade, and how America views Chinese trade and Chinese industry. So my sense is he would like to do that, besides, of course, deepening the European divisions as well. You mentioned that how he's going to go to Hungary and Serbia, which are the largest which is where largest Chinese investments are going on the continent. So he's going to try and deepen the wedge within European Union as well. But beyond that, his intention would be that EU does not view Chinese goods and Chinese industries the same way that America now views.
Well, back in March, the Chinese foreign minister had said Europe's formula was unworkable. In fact, Wang Yi actually said it's like driving to a crossing and finding the red, yellow and green lights all on at the same time, further adding that how can one drive on? I guess, Gauri, with this visit, we'll have to see if Xi Jinping would like to ease that light towards green. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us with that update. Well, in other crucial news, hopes for a Gaza ceasefire appeared slim on Sunday as Hamas reiterated its demand for an end to the war in exchange for the freeing of hostages. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister flatly ruled that out. The two sides blamed each other for the impasse, and the Hamas delegation said it would leave Cairo truce talks to consult with its leadership. However, the Hamas officials plan to return to the Egyptian capital on Tuesday. This is what reports state so far. Mr. Netanyahu has hardened his rejection of Hamas demands for an end to the Gaza war in exchange for the freeing of hostages, saying on Sunday that would keep the Palestinian Islamist group in power and pose a threat to Israel. This is what Mr. Netanyahu believes.
As the Prime Minister of Israel, the one and only Jewish state, I pledge here today from Jerusalem on this Holocaust Remembrance Day, if Israel is forced to stand alone, Israel will stand alone. But we know we're not alone, because countless decent people around the world support our just cause. And I say to you, we will defeat our genocidal enemies. Never again is now.
My colleague Mohammad Ghazali joins us with a live update at the moment. Ghazali, as Hamas indicated a comprehensive ceasefire as part of a hostage release deal, the Israeli Prime Minister has said in no uncertain terms that Israel will not accept an end to the campaign and the withdrawal of IDF troops from the Gaza Strip?
Yes, if you see the developments in the last 24 hours, there have been multiple reports which are coming out of that region, particularly today's Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we've heard Mr. Netanyahu hardening his stance, and also a very relevant statement saying that even if we are alone, we'll continue with the Operation Rafah, we'll get into Rafah and dismantle Hamas completely. And why these statements are coming out of Israel right now? Because reports have also emerged that perhaps with Israel's stubbornness to go ahead with Operation Rafah has not gone down well with the United States, and they have also halted shipment of arms and ammunition for a week, which was meant for Israel. Meanwhile, yesterday Hamas also attacked Kerem Shalom border region, which is the border crossing between Israel and Hamas and Gaza Strip, thereby hinting that perhaps even Hamas is not in a mood to truce. But the reports also suggest that Israel was always going to go ahead with Operation Rafah, which has upset many mediators, because Hamas had accepted the proposal with one rider that perhaps ceasefire should also be included in this entire or the proposal or the peace talks negotiations going on between Israel and Hamas to Egypt and Qatar, and all the negotiators were doing back channel talks, but perhaps Israel was not willing to halt the war completely or to say that withdraw its troops from Gaza, and that is what Mr. Netanyahu also said, and most of the negotiating team of the countries like Egypt, Qatar and other leaders have objected to how Mr. Netanyahu has hardened his stance and why he is not willing to stop the war, and perhaps that is why this entire negotiation which is happening to halt the war has not reached any conclusion, and perhaps today is the Holocaust Remembrance Day. Mr. Netanyahu has used it to its hilt by saying that even if they stand alone, they will continue with Operation Rafah. Since yesterday, aerial attacks in the Rafah area continues. Many people have been killed, but all eyes are now on the ground invasion, which is in the pipeline for so long.
As always, Ghazali, thank you so much for joining us with that detailed update. Meanwhile, Israel has closed the Karem Abu Salem crossing, the main crossing for humanitarian aid to enter into Gaza, after Palestinian armed group fired rockets at a military base in southern Israel near the site, killing 3 soldiers. The Israeli military has said that it closed the Karem Abu Salem crossing, which Israel calls the Karem Shalom crossing, to aid convoys after the attack. The crossing was one of the key passages for aid entering the besieged Gaza Strip. Israeli authorities announced its reopening back in mid-December, following mounting pressure from the United States amid a dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. But despite its reopening, Israeli authorities have allowed only a trickle of assistance needed to address the needs inside the Palestinian territory. An Al Jazeera media network has condemned the Israeli government's decision to close its operations in Israel as a criminal act and warned that the country's suppression of the free press stands in contravention of international and humanitarian law. Israel's Prime Minister's cabinet had voted unanimously to close Al Jazeera's operations in Israel, and the communications minister said the orders were being sent against the network and they will go into effect immediately. Israel's decision escalates the country's long-running feud against Al Jazeera. It also threatens to heighten relations with Qatar, which funds this media network at a time when Doha is playing a key role in mediation efforts to halt the war in Gaza. Israel has long had a rocky relationship with Al Jazeera, accusing it of bias against it and collaborating with the Hamas, but the network has repeatedly rejected these accusations. Meanwhile, press freedom groups have condemned Israel's decision to shut down Al Jazeera.
The Israeli government has unanimously voted to close down Al Jazeera after months of tensions between the country and the broadcaster's coverage of the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has accused Al Jazeera of being a mouthpiece for Hamas and has said the cabinet agreed to the closure of Al Jazeera while the war on Gaza is ongoing.
לאחר דיון בקבינט המדיני-ביטחוני ובהמשך להנחייתי, הממשלה תדון היום בסגירת שידורי אל ג'זירה בישראל. כתבי אל ג'זירה פגעו בביטחון ישראל והסיתו נגד חיילי צה"ל. הגיע הזמן לסלק את השופר של חמאס מהמדינה שלנו, ואני מודה לשר התקשורת שלמה קרעי על פעולתו בנושא.
Following the vote, inspectors from the Israeli Ministry of Communication, backed by Israeli police, raided Al Jazeera's office in the Ambassador Hotel in Jerusalem and confiscated broadcasting equipment. The cabinet vote also allows the blocking of Al Jazeera's website.
הממשלה אישרה עכשיו פה אחד את סגירת שופר ההסתה של החמאס בישראל, הערוץ אל ג'זירה. הצווים נחתמו הרגע, אנחנו מוציאים אותם לפועל. שופר של החמאס, מי שמסית נגד מדינת ישראל, מי שפוגע בביטחון ישראל ובחיילי ולוחמי צה"ל, לא ישדר כאן יותר מישראל וציודו יוחרם.
The Al Jazeera closure is effective immediately and allows Israel to block the channel from operating for 45 days. Meanwhile, Al Jazeera's bureau chief of Israel and the Palestinian territories has responded and called Israel's decision dangerous and one that prevents journalists from doing their job. The bureau chief expressed that Al Jazeera's legal team is working to respond to the regulations.
This is very dangerous decision against Al Jazeera and against the international media at all, because at least it's clear that they want to prevent from any others to know what is happening in this war in Gaza, inside Israel, in the West Bank. Israel cannot claim all the time that she's a democracy, that it's democracy, and at the same time they are cutting and prevent the journalists to do their job. We have a legal team and they are working to respond to these steps and these regulations.
The cabinet's vote to shut down the Qatar-owned media company threatens to heighten tensions at a time that the Doha government is playing a vital role in mediation efforts to halt the war in Gaza that has killed over 34,000 and injured at least 78,000 Palestinians since the October 7 attacks, according to the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza. This is Samia Afsar for NDTV.
Well, switching tracks, the fate of Google's business is now in the hands of Judge Amit Mehta as closing arguments concluded in the landmark trial on Friday. Now, the US Department of Justice and plaintiff states made their last arguments on Google's anti-competitive conduct in the general search market. And on Friday, they focused on its allegedly illegal conduct in search advertising. Now, Google was also under fire separately for failing to retain chat messages that the US government believes could have been relevant to this case. But this 10-week trial, presided over by US District Judge Amit Mehta, featured testimony from the likes of Microsoft chief Satya Nadella and Google CEO Sundar Pichai, the defense's star witness. Basically, the government is trying to show that Google locked up key distribution channels for the general search engine market so that would-be rivals could not grow into significant threats. It says it did so through contracts with phone manufacturers and browser companies to be the exclusive default search engine. If the judge agrees that Google successfully foreclosed competition in that market, he can consider the government's arguments about the search advertising market as evidence of anti-competitive conduct. Joining us for further clarity on what's at stake, Jaspreet Bindra, founder Tech Whisperer Limited, UK at the moment. Thank you so much, Mr. Bindra, for joining us on the World 24/7. Now, the US Justice Department argues that Google has abused a monopoly over the search business, stifling competitors and limiting innovation, something the company vehemently denies. But do you believe Google blocked off healthy competition, or is it an unprecedented decision to punish a company for winning on merit?
You know, history repeats itself. The last time this happened was in 1998-2000, when Microsoft was accused of very much the same allegations. And we all know how that went. Microsoft was considered guilty to an extent. The company wasn't broken up, but it hobbled innovation, and Microsoft took a long time getting out of it. I think something similar is happening to Google. My view is that it's been a long time coming. I think the problem has been that the way monopoly is defined in the US system is that if it hurts the consumer. Now, Google has always claimed that the product is free for the consumer, and their claim also lies on substitutability, that they don't consumers don't necessarily need to go to Google. They can go to Bing instead, they can go to Amazon instead. Now they're even saying that they can go to TikTok instead or Facebook instead, and those are also search platforms, and therefore trying to say that we don't have a absolute dominance in search. However, I think the Justice Department clearly believes that there's an abuse of power. It actually has said that the future of the internet will depend on this trial, and having a search share of greater than 90% in most markets, paying $20 billion to Apple to have search default on the iPhone, having ad practices which sometimes are coercive, as we've seen even in India. I think there is definitely a case for monopoly here.
Right. So while Google argues that it simply makes good search products, on the flip side, do you think the rise of artificial intelligence technology has increased competition?
Well, it's an interesting thing. In fact, one of Google's arguments, which I find a little amusing, is that we have a monopoly, still we innovate and make our search product better. If we had a monopoly. We just had to jack up prices. We really didn't have to innovate. Having said that, I think the rise of generative AI is a big, almost an existentialist threat to the traditional search engine. Many of us know that generative AI or large language models was actually created in the Google Labs in 2017.
Right.
But Google didn't do much about it, probably, I speculate, probably fearing that it would hurt their current business. And so as this technology is taken up by Microsoft, by multiple other players, Perplexity.ai, which is threatening to be a large language model-based search engine, Google itself bringing in generative AI into a lot of their products, definitely we're going to see a new threat. And lastly, but very importantly, if not anything else, I do believe that it will at least force Google to go back to its roots and create search for consumers rather than for advertisers, the way it has become right now.
Well, the findings in the case will then have massive regulatory implications for not just the world's biggest search engine, but also fellow tech giants like Amazon, Apple, and Meta, right?
Absolutely. This is just the beginning of the story. So Lina Khan at the Department of Justice has not only targeted Google, but all the other companies that you name. And each one of them is going to get into regulatory survey. And therefore, it clearly, as the department itself says, is going to determine the future of the internet. What has happened with the internet is that a few companies now dominate it. And that was not the original vision of the internet. The original vision of the internet was a democratized internet where even the small guy, the long tail, would have as much as a say as everyone else. But that's not really what has happened.
Right.
The internet has been captured in a sense by very big companies, and it has benefited us also. But on the other hand, I think it's about time that we have competition in all of these different companies that you mentioned.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Bindra, as always, for joining us on the World 24/7.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And we look forward to what happens in the trial.
Right. The US government argues that Google illegally cemented a monopoly in search by paying Apple and other tech partner billions of dollars to feature the Google search engine in their product. Let's wait and see what happens in this landmark trial. News and updates continue in a moment, right after this very short break. Welcome back. Actor Bernard Hill, who delivered a rousing cry before leading his people into battle in The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, and went down with the ship as the captain in Titanic, has died. The film community has lost a beloved star.